Welcome to the second of our market survey webinars. Thank you everybody for joining us here this afternoon. My name's Julian Barlow, and as someone associated with the built environment, working at a senior level for over 35 years, I will be chairing today's webinar. For those of you who are not familiar, we're GLEAD, the leading international property and construction management consultancy. We're independent and multidisciplinary, and we have a formidable team working with our clients all over the world. And I'm pleased to be able to introduce you to some of our core team here to you this afternoon, who will be driving you through the webinar here. First of all, we have James Garner, who is a senior director. He heads up the analytics and insight team, which produced the market survey on which today's event is focused. Helping James is Nicola Herring, who's our executive surveyor and has an almost encyclopedic knowledge of data and facts, and anything to do with the survey, she is your lady. Providing expert commentary as we go along is Dave Corbin. Dave's our head of UK project and program management. And then joining Dave in the expert corner is Sarah Boonham, who is our head of UK cost management. Thank you for coming along, Sarah. Now, to give you the layout of the webinar this afternoon, we'll be sticking to a 45-minute schedule. And we're going to be fairly disciplined about that, in that we will finish at 4:45 regardless. And as you know, it's the end of the day, and I know we've all got emails and Teams calls, etc., waiting in the wings for us. And so to give you an idea of the breakdown, the presentation's around 20 to 25 minutes with James and Nicola. And then there's some interactive polls with both Sarah and Dave contributing as we go along. And at the end, we have around 20 minutes of questions and answers. And here you get a chance to input during the whole of the webinar process using the Q&A function, please. If you want to ask any questions, just pump them in there. And we want to get through as many as we can before we finish at 4:45. So now, without further ado, I will now hand you over to James, who will provide a little intellectual espresso shot to get you all going through the rest of the afternoon. James, over to you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Julian. And thank you to everyone for joining us on this webinar. So we'll start with an economic overview of where the economy is at the moment. We'll then move on to talk about tender opportunities and what's happening in the tendering market, moving on to site productivity and labour, and then a little bit about what's happening with material prices and increase in material prices in the industry. And then we'll look at threats to the construction industry, and then followed by our inflation forecast for 2021 and then the following 2 years. And before we sum up, we'll just go through some future trends that are going to be impacting the industry this year and beyond. And then I'll hand back to Julian. So as Julian mentioned, there's going to be a number of polls coming up throughout this survey, and it'd be really great if everyone could interact as much as possible. This will really help us with the Q&A function to make sure we're picking the right questions for the audience. And there's also the questions function. So if you've got any questions, please use that. Put questions in the chat. We'll try and cover as many as we can at the end. Any that we can't, we'll be sure to go back to you with after the session. So just a little bit about the methodology of the survey. So it was a very wide-ranging survey that this presentation is based on. We went to contractors, consultants, clients, developers, and we had a really strong response rate of over 200 responses, roughly split 50-50 between contractors and consultants. So we got some really credible insights, and as you will see, some interesting and surprising views. But before we do that, we just want to do our poll number 1, and this should come up on your screen any minute now. We just want to know what type of organization you are. As I said, this will really help with making sure we're picking the right questions when we come to the Q&A. So I'll just give everyone a few moments to fill that in, and hopefully we'll get the results pop up in a moment. Okay, that's great. So we've got around 60% consultants, around 20% contractors, 15% clients, and there's 6 other, whatever that may be. So that's great. That's a really good mix. So thanks for taking part. So moving on then to a very brief update on the general economic overview. So compared to last quarter, things are certainly looking a lot more encouraging as the economy starts to rebound with restrictions being lifted. And in certain sectors, there's a lot of pent-up demand, which I think is going to start fueling this recovery as the quarters and the year rolls on. Also, the full effects of Brexit are still to be determined, but largely we have adapted well with the industry starting to understand the implications of Brexit And I think that's becoming clearer and clearer all the time. Even today, we've heard that the EU have now ratified the trade deal, which just, again, brings ever more certainty to the situation. But there are obviously, in the middle of a pandemic, still some negative issues going on. And there are some pretty stark figures when you look at the economy. GDP is around 7.8% lower than it was in February 2020. And it's actually about 3.1% behind October, which was the previous peak before the government restrictions came in at the end of last year. Also, unemployment is a very difficult one to call. It's increased by around 1% in the year to March, but that's a bit misleading because we won't see the true impact until the furlough scheme is stopped on the 30th of September. So that's just one to look out for. But I think that will be offset by some of this positive news coming through. On the positive side, the government's plan for growth, the Build Back Better, is really starting to kick in. The capital spending plan's worth 100 billion. That's aiming to create new jobs, improve productivity, support the levelling up agenda, whilst also stimulating the recovery. This demonstrates that construction is at the very heart of the UK's economic recovery. Also, the latest data from the Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply indicates that momentum is building for construction recovery, with growth of all major categories of construction activity. And the fastest rise in commercial work for 6.5 years, actually. The UK Construction Activity Index also registered 61.7 in March, and that is compared to 53.3 in February. So you can see that there's been quite a stark increase there. We also have a lot of delayed projects in the likes of hospitality sector, leisure sector, office developments, which are starting to be mobilised again. And workloads are increasing in infrastructure projects and residential construction. And it's just been announced, some of you may have seen, that construction is set for double-digit growth in 2021 of around 13%. And actually, if you split that out a bit more, infrastructure is set to grow by 29%. So we know it's a bit of a mixed picture in terms of different sectors are more muted than others, but overall, there's a lot of positivity there, I think. So before we go on, poll number 2, what we'd like to ask is, have you seen an upturn in activity in the last quarter? And this will be interesting because we'd like to see what the poll says compared to the survey results. So again, I'll give everyone a few moments just to fill that in. And we'll see how close it is to what the 200 respondents had to say. Okay, that is really interesting. 73% have said yes, only 17% no, and 9 said I don't know, which is actually, as you'll see in a moment, even more encouraging than the survey results. So the opportunities in the market in the first quarter of 2021 is much better than anticipated. In our winter survey at the back end of last year, only 23% of contractors and 27% of non-contractors thought that tender opportunities would increase in the first quarter of the new year. What we actually see is far better, with 63% of contractors and 43% of non-contractors reporting increased tender opportunities. And the poll that you've just taken part in is even better again, and is actually in line with going forward. The survey results show that 71% of contractors and 53% of non-contractors were expecting tender opportunities to increase in the next quarter. So the poll results, they were really interesting because it looks like that's been kind of shunted forward to this quarter. So very positive signs there. In terms of the sectors, we asked respondents to give us their top 5 sectors that the current tender opportunities were appearing in. No real surprises, I think, for most people in terms of the sectors: residential, public, health and care, education, infrastructure. But what is interesting behind some of those stats is in our last report, the sectors that people thought were most detrimentally affected by the market conditions would be commercial offices and commercial refurbishments and fit outs. But actually, in this report, we're starting to see an increase there, even with 13% of respondents seeing tender opportunities increase in commercial offices and nearly 20% on commercial refurbishments and fit outs. So it's on the way up, and it supports this noticeable trend of increased activity in the commercial sector as businesses begin to think about how to facilitate this hybrid working model and attract staff back into the office, at least for part of the week. So yeah, really interesting results there. And again, thank you for taking part in that poll. I'm now going to hand you over to my colleague Nicola to take you through some insights on productivity, materials, and also our inflation forecast. Over to you, Nicola.
Thanks, James. So starting with site productivity, 76% of contractor respondents to our survey said that site productivity is within the 81 to 100% range, which was exactly the same as our last report. Restricted numbers of operatives due to social distancing measures continues to have the greatest impact on site productivity, and many sites are undertaking regular testing. There remain some instances of workers and teams needing to self-isolate, and this is sometimes affecting trade start dates and progress on site. Only 17.5% of contractors who responded to our survey reported that they had experienced issues with labour supply in the first quarter. However, 56% said that they had noticed an increase to labour rates. It is expected that the effect of labour issues will be felt later in the year as workload increases and a reduction in EU labour becomes more noticeable. Mechanical and electrical, brick and block layers, and dry lining are the trades currently experiencing the most labour supply issues. There is also concern surrounding consultant roles, with shortages of project managers and fire engineers indicated. 80% of contractor respondents said that they have experienced issues with supply of materials and products on their projects in the first quarter. Issues involved the following or combinations of the following: specified materials and products not being available, longer lead-in times, material price increases, and issues in importing materials, for instance, order delays. Other issues noted were priority being given to NHS projects and increased lead-in times for packages due to availability of related materials, so for example, cladding and then a shortage of steel. Respondents to our survey thought that the predominant causes of increase in material prices was due to COVID-19 and pandemic-related issues. There's a real combination of factors at play. Lockdowns have seen dramatic increases for DIY and garden project materials across most G7 countries. And major economies have seen increases in demand, such as timber in the USA and China with steel. And this has meant that they're importing vast amounts from other countries. COVID-19 cases are also having an impact, with operating restrictions and interruptions where workers need to self-isolate. There are also delays from material imports and time and cost to fill out customs and paperwork stemming from Brexit. There's shortages in shipping containers, which have driven up shipping prices, as shipping issues have been exacerbated by the recent week-long blockage of the Suez Canal. Commodity price increases have been seen as global industry has restarted following the pandemic. And with a shift to renewable energy and electrical vehicles, there is increased demand for materials such as copper and aluminium. On the left-hand side of the slide, you can see that there have been significant increases to material prices in the year to February 2021. The main materials and products experiencing issues are structural steel and reinforcement, plastic products such as drainage and UPVC windows, timber including plywood and veneer. There are also reports of longer lead-in times associated with the following: plaster and plasterboard, insulation, roof tiles, paint, and M&E items such as lighting and lifts. On the right-hand side, you can see what survey respondents thought the most affected packages were, and naturally they relate to these materials. So the top ranking were facade, steel frame, and M&E services. Contractors who responded to our survey saw materials availability and further waves of COVID-19 as the biggest threats to the construction industry, with 42% ranking materials availability as the top threat and 34% seeing further waves of COVID-19 as their top concern. Moving on to inflation, the picture is very similar to our winter report, with a slower first half of the year anticipated due to ongoing COVID-19 restrictions and a smaller pool of projects. The latter part of the year sees inflation picking up into 2022, with the emergence of larger projects and other sectors picking up activity. Pent-up demand will help the wider economy recover and will give confidence to the market. 88% of survey respondents thought that tender prices will increase during 2021, and greater ranges of subcontractor and contractor tender returns are starting to be seen as they have different workloads, pipelines, and appetites for risk. On the left-hand side, you can see the regional forecast for second quarter 21 to first quarter 22. and these are between 1.5% and 2% depending on the region. For second quarter 22 onwards, it's expected that the market would have recovered with a return to more typical inflation between 2.25 to 3.5%, and then 2.5% to 3.75% in 2023. We haven't gone into detail of each and every region here due to time, but our report includes inflation forecasts for each region, as well as an update on regional activity. And now I'll pass to Sarah, who will take you through the first of our future trends.
Thank you, Nicola. Good afternoon, all. So poll number 3, have you seen an increase in repurposing buildings in the last quarter? If you could respond at this point, please. So as we would expect there, a 50% increase in repurposing of buildings to create positive change. Of the 33% that said they haven't seen an increase, I guess we do need to reflect on the fact that repurposing has been evident in our urban centres for many, many years. So that isn't wholly unexpected. So I would like to briefly focus on, as the first of the future trends, urban repurposing, which we did talk about in the last webinar, but continues to be a big theme as the gradual evolution of our towns and city centres has been taken over by an urban revolution. Of course, disruption to our urban life isn't simply about coronavirus. We all know it also reflects technological change. But as such, what we once saw as essential is now discretionary. We don't need to come together to live, to work and to play, albeit we may still choose to do so. So as we emerge from the latest, and let's hope it is the final lockdown, and non-essential shops start to reopen, there is truly a sense of release for us all. Encouraging footfall levels are now being recorded, now reaching 70% of 2019 levels as that bounce back gains momentum. But unfortunately, with 11,000 retail and food and beverage units closing in 2020 and the fear of 18,000 more in 2021, that repurposing of redundant space to revitalise our urban centres and also to better meet the needs of the changing consumer is more vital than ever. Touching on the commercial market, which is still giving better results from the landlords than the food and beverage market, with 90% of rents collected 35 days after payment became due on the December quarter day. We recognise that shrinking footprints and shorter leases will become the norm going forwards. So whilst we might be redesigning offices in the short term for social distancing with that 8 metre squared per person high density occupation criteria a distant memory, in the long term we're looking to create more flexible workspace with lots of services to act as a destination with a purpose. And that purpose is going to be to meet your co-workers, to get inspiration and to exchange ideas. And we all know that attracting, retaining and nurturing top talent requires stimulating workplace, which transmits our brand. And buzzy locations in vibrant cities will still make sense for lots of organisations. But given these changes in the retail and commercial market, the board has effectively been wiped clean on preconceptions around occupiers of these urban centres to take over those redundant buildings, which sets the scene for future classes of occupiers, new classes of occupiers to come in, and it allows the independents to take centre stage, giving each location a unique feel. The most radical changes that we've seen to the town centre planning system for the last 30 years is supporting this recovery and reimagination and promoting flexibility by simplifying use classes and extending permitted development rights. So I suppose we should briefly at this point remind ourselves that the need to create thriving economic hubs stems from the economic benefit of the city, recognising that 14% of all jobs are created in city centres, which account for only 0.1% of UK land take. As such, our economy is driven by the success of our towns and cities, which also act as the glue in our society, offering the places where we choose to come together. So we cannot allow our urban centres and the buildings within them to sit redundant and decay. So thankfully, the local authorities have bought into this concept prior to the pandemic, snapping up those high streets and shopping centres that were ripe for regeneration. And of course, you know, a few have caught a cold along the way, as we all recognise, and the balance sheets aren't as healthy as they were. But the local authorities still embrace and recognise the fact that the private sector cannot deliver this transformation alone. And hence models of shared risk and responsibility are coming into play. And there are many more examples of local authorities taking the lead in the funding and delivery of these repurposing schemes, which will stimulate further investment in line with their local plan. In addition, of course, not forgetting central government's intervention in the form of the 3.6 billion town funds, future high street funds, which is ongoing in terms of its allocation and welcomed, but also the portion of the new 4 billion levelling up fund, which is earmarked to town centres and high streets, is absolutely fantastic. So going forward, we're looking to a model of public and private partnerships to support this repurposing, to apply principles of good placemaking, to create resilient towns and city centres, focusing on accessibility, connectivity, multi-layered places, which unlock value and create the necessary footfall drivers to keep people visiting. And we must also put people at the heart of the creative process in remodelling our towns and city centres to allow us to unearth the real needs of the community and empower stakeholders to create these permissive environments for town centre adaptation. And not forgetting, lastly, that hyper-localism is the silver lining of the pandemic. And as such, for me, maybe the concept of the 15-minute city will be more relevant than ever as we work towards both COVID recovery and the creation of places that are vibrant, valued, and sustainable from the outset. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Sarah. Good afternoon, everyone. A nice, straightforward, simple poll for you all to get going on this particular section. If you may advise if you've heard of a construction playbook, that'd be great. So, depending on where the audience operates, I guess that's no surprise. If you operate heavily in the public sector, then it's been quite prevalent in recent months, but it's yet to really find its way into the general domain. So it's really interesting stats there. For us, it's something that we've been spending quite a lot of time on. It was launched in December 2020, and it is starting to feature really heavily across the public sector. The document is features on 14 key policies, which include better procurement, visibility of pipeline, digitising our industry, social value, and outcome-based performance measurements, which are all underpinning the government's agenda and strategy to harmonise, digitise and rationalise. So if you're working in the public sector, this is a key document to take a look at. It's freely available on the gov.uk website. The Gleeds website actually also has some summary documents and some features, so feel free to read at your leisure. So I mentioned some of those 14 key policies. The playbook kind of builds on themes that we've seen over recent years. So I think BIM's been around for about 10 years, and it promotes further use of building information modelling. Modern methods of construction is a thread that goes through it. Social value has an increased importance with all public sector tenders now having a 10% weighting on social value, and partnering is at the core. So many of you who might recall Egan and Latham building on that collaboration, looking at long-term partnering solutions, and it runs through the document. Now, I guess it's no surprise that fighting climate change is also a key feature, and the journey to achieving net zero carbon is embraced throughout the playbook. We're seeing clients now put more emphasis on sustainability than we have before, which is no surprise given that the population is demanding it. So again, government bodies which have to comply with the playbook as part of their procurement solutions need to put the relevant focus on those emerging trends that we've seen in the industry over a period of time, and for me it's another building block to making it a reality. In my opinion, though, achieving net zero carbon is probably the productivity improvement in our industry that's needed most. And I believe that we're on the cusp of major change in our industry with some major industry disruptors on the horizon or already breaking through. We're seeing clients require different ways of working. We're seeing the introduction of more automation, the way that projects are financed, and tools that are increasing predictability. So from a consulting point of view, can we predict the outcomes of projects and the likely scenarios much earlier than we have done in the past? And all of those tools and systems are now emerging on the market and becoming more common, and the industry is starting to embrace that. So given that this is kind of mandated for public sector bodies, we then look at our private sector clients and try to work out if we think that they're going to follow these trends. And because the playbook was developed by a combination of public sector bodies and private sector organisations, I believe that we will see the public sector start to follow. It might take time, like with lots of initiatives. The public sector might adopt the playbook more heavily at the outset, but the principles are sound, and therefore in time I think we'll see the private sector adopting the same. So as I say, there's some more information on our website if anyone wants to read. The full document is available on the gov.uk website. There's lots of information out there on it. It's definitely something to be aware of, especially if you're operating in the public sector, but in my opinion it won't be long until we see it across the private sector too. Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Dave. So the last poll of the day, and it's a big question. How big an impact do you think digital transformation of the industry will have on your role in the next 3 years? And there's a few options there, ranging from no impact, minor impact, significant impact, major impact, and completely evolve, major impact. If I don't adapt, I could become obsolete. So again, last poll, as I said, so please take part and let's see what the answers are here. Okay, so the majority, 41% of you think it's going to have a significant impact, and then it's kind of balanced between major impacts in terms of completely evolve and a minor impact, a few tweaks. 12% of you thinks if you don't adapt, you could become obsolete. But interestingly, only 1% say there's going to be no impact. So I think that is the reality. There's going to be some impact, and it's just a question of where on that scale. But that's really interesting feedback. So what do we mean when we talk about digital transformation? So digital transformation is really starting to affect all areas of the industry, but it's quite a wide-reaching topic. And I think we can break it down into 3 key areas. You have design and BIM, which includes federated model, digital twins, generative design. You've got project data analytics, things like computer science, machine learning, the better use of data to provide foresight and sort of make sure we're not repeating the same mistakes over and over again in our industry. And then you've got site technology and robotics. That can include things like MMC, point cloud technology, and robotics on site. And one of our questions in the survey was, are you prioritizing IT spend? And the majority, 60% of respondents said they were. I think the next thing we want to see, and we'll start asking, is what are you spending that on? Do you have a digital transformation and a data strategy, or is this just about getting back up to speed and getting to ground zero, if you like? So I think we're going to see a lot more organizations really looking at their full digital transformation and data strategy and looking 3-5 years ahead about where they want to be. Because many of these technologies are going to alleviate some of the skill shortages we're going to be coming up against, some of the other issues that we're coming up against. And, you know, a lot of you have probably seen new technologies and products entering the market almost weekly. And it's quite hard to keep track of, you know, which ones are going to break, which ones are going to have an impact. And I think the reality is it's taking all these things together. You have BIM, which, as Dave said, has been around for a while now, but, you know, what's the next generation? moving to digital twins, generative design, artificial intelligence, data analytics, virtual reality and augmented reality. I think when you start combining those things, that's where we can really start fulfilling the ambitions the industry have. In a lot of ways, the ideas of what we want to do have been around for a while. And I think we're kind of at the point where technology is catching up with our ambition. So it's a really exciting time to be in the industry. And I think the next 3, 5, and then, going on for the next decade is going to have a really interesting output of what the industry will become. So moving on then to sum up before we move to questions and answers, largely a positive picture. And the industry, I think, has put itself in a really good position over the last year by adapting. And I think the next quarter is going to be critical as the restrictions are lifted in terms of, there are still questions out there. Will there be another variant? Will there be another lockdown? Obviously, we all hope not. But how would we adapt to that if that does happen? Is the industry ready to meet the challenges to address the demand that looks like it's coming our way? And how can we continue to evolve and adapt in 2022 and beyond and carry on this idea of flexibility and innovation that we've really kind of got hold of over the last year to stay relevant and keep up with the digital revolution? So I think it's a really exciting time and some encouraging signs coming out. So before I hand back to Julian for the Q&A, just to let you know that our report and past reports and lots of thought leadership that we do across the industry on different topics, it's all available at gleeds.com. So feel free to log on there anytime and have a look at the publications that we have. On that note, I'll hand you back to Julian now to do the Q&A.
Okay, thank you very much, James. That's great. And thanks to James, Nicola, Dave and Sarah for that contribution. That was really interesting and great to see so much interaction with our audience out there. Good of you to take part. Now we move on to the spontaneous element of the afternoon. This is where we see whether the guys and ladies really know what they're talking about. These are questions that have come from those watching the webinar. And let's kick off, since we're running a little over. We've got a question from actually a guy in New York, in America. It must be a late morning over there. So good to see you're watching us, Chris. Many people have adapted their working methodology to encompass home working, or what we call blended working, as core to running their business lives in the past 18 months. Sarah, this is for you really. 3 questions arise from this finding. Is sort of blended working, home working here to stay in your view? And are employers looking to either repurpose existing buildings or what to take account of this process? And if so, how?
Okay, I'll try and be brief, Julian, being as we're over time. Yeah, of course, blended working is here to stay for many of us. I suppose to sort of understand the how and the why, we really need to sort of ask ourselves, what is the role of the office going forward, how that aligns with our corporate strategies, what our employees want. We know they want more choice and more freedom. I suppose throughout the pandemic, we've sort of celebrated the success of increased productivity in some areas that sat alongside the working from home. But I guess we do need to recognise that in this knowledge economy in which we find ourselves, both business and personal success does require face-to-face interaction and collaboration. And of course, learning opportunities for our younger team members is a challenge with the working from home environment. So, that working from home fatigue, it's getting to all of us. We're missing the social interaction and engagement that we took for granted in our workplaces. So to me, going forward, what do you call it? You call it resilient, you call it flexible, you call it agile working space. That will be required, that safe working environment that we're all too conscious of nowadays. But we want some increased feel-good factor as well, I guess. But something that helps us to raise productivity, enhance the brand, and promote creativity. And of course, not forgetting that technology and true connectivity will be key attributes. And also a space that helps us improve our diet and exercise, which we've all started to do during lockdown. But I think the thing probably we do need to remember is we're just considering now home working or the office working, but there will be third spaces coming along, maybe on our local high streets, which are working hubs, and it'll create an ecosystem of multiple options for workers. But we will need real-time physical space. that fulfills that human need for face-to-face social connection. What it will look like going forward, you know, who knows? We're not really sure, but we do know that it'll iterate over time, and so we need to remain flexible.
Okay, Sarah, thanks for that. We'll come on to the next one now, racing ahead. It's from Karen from Balfour Beatty. For you, Dave, this one. Over 80% of respondents, she noted, that said the impact of the green agenda and the demand of meeting net zero carbon targets is going to impact the construction sector in the short term. How can the industry, from design to construction, prepare for the inevitable demands that this agenda is going to make? And will it add appreciable costs to the construction of buildings or repurposing of buildings, whether kind of repurposing existing stock or building new? What do you think, Dave?
Yes, I think that's a quick answer to the cost question. I think it is going to cost more in the short term, but I don't think it's something that can or should be avoided. So we're seeing an increased amount of or increased level of importance put on sustainability across the whole estate, whether it's private sector or public sector. I think the public sector are a bit more. They've got a bit more sense of purpose about how they do it across their programs of work with key clients. The private sector are doing it more because they need to. The population demands it. Employers that want to take space, the sorts of offices that Sarah just referred to, know that unless they have green credentials in their buildings, then tenants won't take the space. So it is adding capital outlay. I think the DfE are adding about 18% to their budgets at the outset in order to accommodate net zero carbon in operation on the existing estate, on top of the projects that they would build, whether it new blocks or others. And I think it's here to stay, and quite right too. I think we're behind the curve, and we should embrace it. But it does.
Okay, sorry. Okay, Dave, great, thanks. Looking at, here's a question from Architects SOM, Lucy, and it's really one for the team, I suppose, but maybe James with a little bit of Dave. A key finding of the survey was the shortage of materials and the impact that the supply and demand issue is going to have on inflation. Based on the overwhelming evidence that there is currently a material shortage in many areas, do you see this impacting the government's Build Back Better campaign? And will they have to be coming to the taxpayer for more money as a result of increased costs in building public sector schemes? I can see this being a sensitive one for Rishi. What do you think, James?
Okay, yeah, I'll start, and Dave, if you want to go in afterwards. I think the first thing to say is that the current kind of material price hikes and the shortages are the result of a bit of a perfect storm. You know, you've got COVID, you've got Brexit, commodity price increase, government legislation. So we've never been in this position before, I think, where everything has happened at the same time. So whilst in the short term, it's definitely having an impact, as our survey shows, I think over the longer term, I think supply and demand, things will start leveling off. And when you look at the Build Back Better schemes, a lot of them are long-term schemes. So I think over the course of the schemes, things will level out. There'll be price hikes now, and then things over the next 2 to 3 years will start leveling out. But I think that there is a risk of, procurement of longer term price contracts being more difficult and contractors taking the risk on that. I don't know what you think, Dave.
I'm trying to think. Where we're going to see this most, and the one thing that is that's featured over the last sort of 18 months or so is certainty of the market and confidence. And one of the things we have seen from tender returns are that contractors are reluctant, I think understandably, to take the risk of that over a long period of time. So they might take the risk over things that they can order early and have a relative confidence about. But if your project starts stretching over 2+ years, then we're starting to see clients being asked to sort of take that risk of inflation on, or indeed having to pay for the contractor to take that risk. So I think that's something to watch, and I think it all comes down to this confidence and certainty of what the market's doing.
Okay, great. Now, look, I want to give you a question here that's sort of an all-capturing question, and I want to have all 5 of you give me an answer. And I'll go to Sarah first. because we've got 5 minutes to go. And I think this is probably what people most want to know. If they saw the first webinar, moving to the second webinar, what changes have you seen in the sector landscape over the last 3 months? So if we take this as like a 12-week window, which I know is a really short time in a very busy sector, but Sarah, what have you noticed is kind of the biggest things that surprised you, or the biggest change, or maybe nothing surprised you?
I think commercial bouncing back, speculative commercial, particularly in the capital, has come back quicker than we actually thought, and central government continuing to roll out Boris's billions is really boosting the pipeline in infrastructure, town and city centre sectors, and the whole of the levelling up. So
great, thanks, Sarah.
I've kept it brief.
No, that's great. Thanks, Sarah. That's helpful. Nicola, what do you think?
Yeah, I definitely think we've seen a real upturn in activity. At the time of the last survey and the report, there was real caution due to increased COVID cases and a new strain, and then Brexit uncertainty. So I just think we're hearing from a lot of sources that there's been a real uptick in activity, which is really good to hear.
Great, Nicola. Dave?
One is the robustness of the residential market. We've seen that sector is emerging really strongly at the moment, as and I think on the slides it was shown as the one with the most tender opportunities, and we're seeing that as a business. So I thought it was going to be healthcare, education, but actually residential's really strong at the moment. And then picking up on a comment that's come in from Phil West, I think it's quite linked. He's asked about, given that it's over 25 years since Latham and Egan, and how confident are we about the playbook and its effectiveness? And I have the same skeptical view when I saw it, and did ask myself the same question. But I've been really surprised over the last 3 months how much it's featuring within public sector client organisations, and it does actually seem to have real gusto this time, and it's a bit more than a report with some ideals. It's a mandate for public sector bodies to follow. So it will take a while, I think, but I've been really impressed with how that's featuring quite heavily.
That's great.
And 12 weeks is a short window in construction, Julian.
Yeah, I know, and I thought it was useful maybe to bridge the two market surveys if there was anything that leapt out at you. And I do think we're in unusual circumstances coming out of a pandemic, which that's why I kind of. James, what do you think?
I agree with all that, and I think for me, they're not necessarily a surprise, but I think we should just be really proud as an industry that we've been quite robust, and we've come out of this, and we're now seeing the sort of green shoots, and a lot of that is due to the work that everyone's put in over the past year, and we've put ourselves in a really good position, I think, as an industry to really go on from here. And I think we've got this opportunity now that we've emerged from the pandemic. Innovation starting to become a real important part of what we're doing. We've got things like the Playbook, and actually I think it's a generational chance for us to really push on as an industry to the next level. So I'm really optimistic, actually.
That's great. Okay, guys. Well, we're reaching the end. We've got about 50 seconds left to go. I'd like to thank you all for taking part today, both Sarah, Nicola, Dave, James. These things don't just happen, they come together because a team worked really hard. And Amy Kernow has been responsible for getting the whole project on the road and making sure we were here and in the right place at the right time. So thank you, Amy. Great work again. If you guys want to see the survey, it will be sent to everybody who kind of participated in the webinar and joined us today. It'll be sent on afterwards. There will be another one of these events in the summer. And if you want any information on anything you've learned today, feel free to go on to www.gleeds.com. That's us. So once again, thank you for joining us and have a lovely afternoon.